Today, we are going to be talking about monetizing soft skills, the ROI of training EQ. And I know that this is an important subject for many of you. Ann and I were just talking a little earlier. I said, I know that those of you that are here today with us know the importance of this, but the challenge is, how do you translate that? How do we lead our leaders to the light, so to speak? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Jamie Thomason, and I work here with Mersion. I also have one of my colleagues, Jacob Nicolau, you might see on the panelist chat. I am going to invite Ann to really introduce herself. The reason that we brought her on board is because Ann believes that leaders need to be both head smart and heart smart for continued success and satisfaction. And we agree 100%. And I'm going to ask Ann to just say hi now.
Great. Hello. So I am a Canadian, but I'm living in London, England right now. So in talking, I might say dollars and Great British pounds. Don't worry, it's all just currency. Great to be here. Thank you, Jamie.
Great. Thank you for that. I love it. I was just asking, like, how did you end up there? All right. So briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with us, Mersion exists to practice those difficult workplace conversations. We are VR for social effectiveness. So we provide a psychologically safe space for practicing difficult conversations that could be motivating an underperforming team, de-escalating inter-office conflict, adapting to different work styles, creating a safe and inclusive workspace, or perhaps even getting that buy-in for that training needs to happen within the organization. And that's what we're going to do today. A little peek behind the curtain about how it works. We call that human in the loop a simulation specialist. And that's actually how I started out with this company, as a simulation specialist, was delivering in the corporate world, fell in love with what we do, and kind of ended up on this side. So that sim specialist, that human in the loop, works in conjunction with artificial intelligence to drive avatars in customizable environments, with customized scenarios, so that your learners can gain the confidence and the competence to go out into the world and have those difficult conversations. And at this point, I just want to go ahead and just turn things over to Ann Taylor. Thanks for being here, Ann.
Great. Thank you, Jamie, for having me. So I want to take everyone back quite a few years to when I was 33 years old. I was working at Nestle Canada in their confectionery department, and I was leading a cross-functional team of professionals to launch a new confectionery product into the marketplace. And that product was called Smarties Block. Now, for the Americans in the group, in Canada, and pretty much everywhere else in the world, Smarties are candy-coated chocolate pieces. And for everybody, Smarties Block was a reusable Lego connecting block filled with Smarties. This was my baby. I was being tasked with launching this, and I wanted to deliver it on time and on budget. Being the task-oriented, detail person I wanted to make sure that this happened for the team, for the company, and for the consumers. I remember one specific meeting. We were sitting in a conference room, a windowless conference room, around a big table. And I was painstakingly going through the critical path. Okay, everybody, so where are we at? What's happened? Going through every single task. What's been done? What hasn't been done? And on the things that weren't done yet, I would probe. Why isn't it done? What stopped us meeting the deadline? What needs to happen to move this forward? What are you doing about it? When will it be done? We can't let this slip. It has a knock-on effect on all the next steps. So I just want to ask you now, hearing that and how I was, drop a word or two in the chat about what that felt like for you. Because I imagine, yeah, so cold, pressure and interrogation, definitely, Dennis. It was really disconnected from the people. Not human, yep, stressful. I was putting pressure onto adults in an already pressurized scenario. I wanted them to work faster if possible, or at least be on time. I was leading by spreadsheet. Now, like most leaders, I wasn't a horrible person. I was kind, respectful. My colleagues would say I was very friendly and nice to work with. I was just disconnected from the humanity of working with other people. I kind of say I was a bit asleep to the notion of engaging, motivating, and inspiring others. During that time, I did have moments where I went, oh, this isn't right. It's not feeling right for me. I don't know what to do. I knew that was happening, but the problem was I couldn't figure out how to change it. So I would just go back to my default task orientation, detail orientation, and keep doing that. Well, go forward a mere 7 years, and I didn't realize that my whole world would change, and it would impact who I was as a leader in business, as well as a person. And that change was the death of both my parents unexpectedly 22 weeks apart. There they were in their prime on a cruise in Panama. Little did I know that mere years after that picture was taken, they would die unexpectedly. All the things I had been doing in terms of competence, control, doing, were at total odds to the idea of emotional intelligence, feelings, emotion, and connection. With their deaths, this contrast became personal. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't an instantaneous change. The week before my father passed away, actually in hospital, the head nurse took me aside and said, be his daughter, not his nurse. And that's what I wanted to be. I just really didn't know what that meant. I thought that if I monitored his vitals, if I made blackout curtains for his hospital bedroom so that he could sleep, if I cajoled doctors and staff to do more for him, that I would get the outcome I wanted, that I would get to bring my father home. Little did I know that 2 short months later, I'd be in a palliative process again with my mom. After their deaths, when I was back in Switzerland, where I was living and working actually at the time, it was real easy to throw myself back into work, make up for the time that I had missed, make up for the time that other people had to step in and do parts of my job. And it was easy to kind of have their deaths be back across the ocean. In fact, not many of my colleagues asked about my absences. It was easy to put it all in a box, close the lid, until I couldn't anymore. I sat in meetings feeling like it was all a bit false, a bit superficial. I was going through things and nothing was being said. And I was wondering who else in that meeting was going through something and it wasn't being said. So really the idea of connection and genuine feelings beckoned me, both professionally and personally. Now, still being that detailed, logical person that I wanted, or that I was, and wanting change for myself, I did what I do. I started reading more, researching more, looking into relationships, interpersonal communication, leadership books. I read, I did research. In fact, I retrained. I'm now a leadership coach. I retrained to be a coach and moved out of that business career into coaching to help people live their full potential. And through that journey, for myself, as well as hundreds of my clients that I coach, I learned 3 really valuable lessons, which is what I'd like to share with you today. The first is that emotions are always present because of our brain structure. Companies want to say that they're factual, they're logical. You always hear, oh, business, it's all about the facts. Well, actually, organizations do want emotions. They want the emotions of calm, confident, enthusiastic, positive, perseverance. They want those emotions. They just don't want the bad emotions. Anger, sadness, annoyance, frustration. Well, it's kind of hard to argue. You can't have one without the other. And that's because of our brain structure. Our bodies are a system of nerves that collect data and transmit that data up through the spinal cord into the brain stem of the back of our heads. And the first place that those impulses hit is what's called the limbic system. It's the place of emotions and feelings within our brain. It's only once that they go through that area before they get to the neocortex. That's the place of rational thought. It's almost the farthest from the brainstem that you can get. So emotions are always present. In fact, they're often the first thing triggered with any of the data that comes from our nervous system. Emotions are present whether we like it or not, and whether we're conscious of that or unconscious of it. So that's the first rational reason of why emotional intelligence matters. The second is because of sociology. Humans are herd animals. Now, some sociologists aren't quite that bleak about it. They say we're social animals. Well, regardless of the title, humans survive in highly connected groups. Look at what's happening right now with the pandemic. We're starting to see a real increase in incidence of mental health issues because of the isolation and social restrictions caused by the pandemic. Humans thrive in collective environments. They want to feel they belong. They want to feel that interconnection with other people. Work is no different. In fact, people spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day at work. Those are where we spend the most waking hours of a day. People want to feel as if they belong. Doing things, tasks, results focused aren't enough. People also need to feel like they belong to a team. And the third rational reason of why feelings or emotions are important in work is what I call monetizing soft skills. It's the financial quantification of soft skills. Now, you might be sitting there going, yes, I believe it, because people that are on these roundtables believe in emotional intelligence. I'm watching the comments come through in the chat that said, you know, we need to be human in a work environment. You're wondering, how do you do it though? And that's what I'd like to share with you now. It's a simple 3-step process to monetize soft skills. And this came to light for me in a discussion I was having with a leader in 2016. It was here in the UK. It was a leader of a small to medium-sized enterprise. I'd be working with him and his team on and off for about a year. And in talking to that leader, he had a real reluctance to talk to one of his direct reports about some poor people skills they were exhibiting. In talking to him, he's like, well, you know, it's an awkward conversation. I don't really know how to do it. I certainly don't know how to do it well. And really, is it going to make a difference? So I did what I do as a coach. I asked a series of questions. He answered them, and I wrote down what he said. And it's a simple 3-step process. The first step is the behavior. What is the behavior that this person is exhibiting? How often do they do that poor behavior? How many times a day? How many days a week? Now, in this example, it was one of his direct reports who every day would go into an open plan environment and berate one of the staff for not hitting the target the previous day. He would do it at least once a day, every day, 5 to 6 days a week. The second step is the impact. What is the impact of that behavior on the individual? And by that, I mean, how many minutes do you think they're off their game, that they're not working, that they're not productive? How many other people witnessed this as well? And how long do you think those people were distracted from doing the work at hand? And that distraction can be them in their heads thinking, oh, I'm glad it wasn't me today. Or, oh, great, here goes the manager being an idiot again. Or the distraction could be people that end up meeting in the olden days in the coffee room or in the kitchen and complaining about the manager behind his back. So those are all quantifiable amount of time that's lost from the business. So in this example, I asked him, he said, there's 12 people in that open plan environment hearing this every day. Some probably distracted 5 minutes. There's going to be a few distracted probably 10 minutes because it would have hit them a bit harder or a bit differently. So I said, okay, 7 minutes on average. The leader also recognized that he thinks he interrupted a couple of these complaining sessions in the coffee station. They stopped when he walked in, but in hindsight, he realized it was probably people, because they were from the team, complaining about the manager. We know, and I've seen it in the chat come up here, that the unintended impact of that type of berating behavior is negative emotions, or what a business would call negative emotions. Shame, embarrassment. There might be some apathy. Oh, here he goes again, means nothing, this is useless. Could be humiliation. It could be anger, frustration, annoyance. Those are all the unintended impacts of that type of behavior. The third step in monetizing people's skills is the cost. What is the average salary of those people? Now, in this case, they were actually billed out by the hour. So you could either look at what is the average salary of these people or what is their bill out rate. And then you literally do the math. How many people were distracted? How long were they distracted? How many times a day? How many days a week? For how many weeks a year? At what cost, whether it's salary or bill out? You do the calculation and literally can come up with an answer of what that poor performance means in terms of lost productivity. For the example I'm sharing with you, the number that came up was 120,000 Great British pounds. Let's just call it dollars though. $120,000 of poor or lost productivity because of that poor people skills. So I said to the leader, look, let's assume you're wrong by 50%. And we have the figure to 60,000. Would $60,000 of increased productivity be worth you having a conversation with that direct report? Now, this is the moment that was a light bulb moment for both he and I. He said yes, so we worked on how he could do that well. For me, the light bulb moment was the realization that it wasn't me telling him that he needed to have this conversation and that this direct report was wrong. Rather, it was about me helping him see the value by using his language, by focusing on the things that matter to him, and coaching or walking him through the process in order to have that realization for himself. So in effect, he was awoken just like I was. Now, 2 caveats with that example that I've just shared with you. One is that I knew the berating behavior was going on because the team had told me. People in HR often know where things might be going wrong. You guys get the complaints or the grievances. You hear some of the gossip or tales being talked about certain individuals. So you could know where it is. You can also just ask the leader, where do they think the biggest opportunities are in the organization to increase engagement and hence productivity? And they can point you to the scenarios, and then you can go through this monetizing process with them. The second caveat to this is I know it's about poor people skills, and it is easier isolating some bad behavior and quantifying the impact of that financially. This can also be done though for good or great people skills. So for example, if you said to a leader, where in the organization would it be helpful to increase productivity 10 minutes a day for employees? And then start to do the calculation with them. Right now in the US, the average salary is $40,000 for a full-time position. So what is 10 minutes of increased productivity at that salary worth? At that salary, what is that worth? It's actually worth $835 per employee per year. Now, for one employee, that doesn't sound like much, okay? Multiply it by 100, that's $84,000. Let me say that again. 10 minutes of extra productivity per employee per day for an organization of 100 employees is $84,000 of increased productivity. If you're in a large organization with 1,000 employees, that's almost $840,000 of increased productivity. $840,000. That's a lot of money for most organizations. So this can be used to quantify the value of improved people skills, soft skills, or more emotionally intelligent interactions. So the conclusion for me out of this was that I could work with logical, analytical leaders and show them things in their own language, logic and financials, to make the case for better interpersonal communications. Monetizing it is just about identifying the behavior, noticing the impact, and calculating the cost or value. By enrolling leaders in soft skills, using their language, using the financials that are important to them, being a role model for soft skills ourselves, has them at least stop and reflect to think that maybe they do need to take at least one step towards being better and interacting with others. And at worst, they can no longer deny the importance of soft skills. So when I look back at my 33-year-old self in that critical path meeting, being cold and unconnected, the wisdom I would give myself is to look up, to connect with the people, to connect with the purpose and vision for why we're here, to talk about the work, of course, and to talk about the feelings behind the work. If I had done this, I feel I would have engaged their hearts and not just their heads and their hands. They wanted it, I wanted it. So now I do believe that when people are more emotionally intelligent, business, the results and lives are better. People are more productive, and it's a much more enjoyable experience. So I ask you as professionals that know the importance of emotional intelligence, first, be confident in your knowledge of emotional intelligence and soft skills. And secondly, use your soft skills with the managers and leaders that you work with. Put yourself in their shoes, use their language, Focus on the metrics that matter to them and engage them in a way where you are actually role modeling soft skills, coaching them to come to the solution rather than trying to convince them. We here today all know that soft skills can yield hard results. Let our leaders and managers experience that for themselves. Thank you, and I open the floor to any questions.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for that. And thank you for opening up and sharing your story. And it touched close to home to me, and I understand it. And so we appreciate you sharing the path to what led you to this, as well as these great steps that we can take to actually help, as I said earlier, lead our leaders to the light, so to speak. We do have some questions that are coming in. I'm going to invite folks to continue to bring those questions on. We're going to transition just real quick into a quick conversation with an avatar, because we always like to do that as part of what we do here at Version, and especially for those that haven't seen it, but it also just gives us the opportunity to see what we're talking about put into action. And so Anne has bravely agreed to step in and share her expertise with us. So I'm going to invite our host, Nina, to come on board and say hello.
Today, we will be talking to Mitchell. Mitchell is the CEO of a large company. His employees have been asking for more comprehensive training and support. He needs to give his approval for training initiatives around EQ. He seems hesitant in your prior calls to give the go-ahead. You've asked for this meeting with him to see if you can hear his concerns and convince him to move forward with the trainings.
Hi, Mitchell. How are you?
Pretty good. Can't complain. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to meet with me today to talk about the emotional intelligence training that we've been discussing.
Yeah, I've been giving it some thought, and I'm really, really hesitant around it. I'm definitely more of an old school kind of guy. I like to keep personal things personal and business things separate from that. It's like everyone always says, right? It's not personal, it's just business, and I think that's kind of the way I want to stick with things for now.
Yeah, okay. Are you open to some discussion about it, or have you made your decision?
Listen, I'm always open to a conversation. There has been a lot of talk on the team about this kind of training, and I definitely want to hear what the pros and cons would be. I don't want to just make a decision outright, but I'm definitely we're very busy right now, and I'm not sure if we even have time for trainings like these, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your honesty, and I appreciate your openness with your hesitancy.
Yeah, I'm a very upfront kind of guy. I definitely I'm more interested in results at this point, and at the end of the quarter, we're just kind of pushing to get sales more engaged and active, and there might be some better trainings for that. I think I think that this is great, but maybe we should be looking at different trainings potentially.
Yeah, there's always soft skills and hard skills, both need to be trained. So let me just
Absolutely.
ask you some questions then. You kind of said, business is business, it's factual and logical.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
do you want people to be enthusiastic when they come to work?
Well, yeah, that's the hope. I hope that people like what they do. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want people to be passionate about what we do here?
Definitely important.
Do you want people to be confident in how they do their jobs?
Absolutely. That's a requirement. That's a must.
Okay, and now one last one. Do you want people to be calm under pressure?
Yeah, yeah. I definitely would like for people to be calm under pressure. We've got a lot of pressure going on around here. So yeah, I think that's definitely something my team needs.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. So all of those things that we just talked about, calm, confident, passionate, enthusiastic, those are all emotions. They're all
Hmm.
personal to each individual. That's the personal stuff that our team members are bringing every day when they come to work.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from with this, and you're right. Everything that you mentioned, those are all personal and I guess emotional. But you know, how do I look at a training like that and just kind of measure its success? You know, how do I guess I don't understand how we take that training and implement it in a way that we see results from. You know, I don't know if I can measure how confident someone is other than them telling me, yes, I'm confident. How does that translate to the sales we need to generate?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. That's always one of the big things. How do we prove the ROI of some of these learning techniques? So one thing is, if right now our average salary in the organization for our full-time people is $40,000.
Right.
So if we could get 10 minutes a day per employee of increased productivity because they felt more confident, they were inspired and motivated and able to have difficult conversations, would that be of value?
Yeah. Yes, I think it would. Uh, as I said, you know, I'm just more of a results kind of guy, and so I guess you know, measuring those results is more subjective, I guess. But yeah, I do think that those things are important.
Because at our average salary of 40,000, that 10 minutes is worth $835 a year per
Right.
employee.
Okay.
So we're a pretty big company. We've got more than 1,000 people working here. That's $835,000 for just 10 minutes more productivity a day.
Wow. Yeah. That's that's a big number. I guess that's, you know, that's measurable. If people are more productive, then, you know, we're getting more bang for our buck.
Exactly. How do we make sure that the hours that they're spending working, we're getting the most out of them in a way that's motivating and inspiring and enjoyable for everybody?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think that those are really good points. Not necessarily willing to just go full speed ahead at this point, but why don't we put a pilot program in place and get an initial rollout started, and we can go from there. If it looks like it's really effective, we can definitely talk about implementing it company wide.
Yeah. That would be great, Mitchell. I'd look forward to doing that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much for your support.
Hi, Anne. How are you? How are you feeling after that conversation?
Great, thank you. It's always kind of exciting and a bit nervous doing these things, but it's fun. Thank
Yes,
you.
of course. Of course. Well, it was great to see all of the elements that you mentioned in your presentation kind of put into practice. I know for me, I think that makes a lot of sense, you know, to hammer those points home. Normally, at this point in a simulation, we'll do reflection. We ask questions like, what went well in the conversation? What could you do better? But given the fact that you're kind of the expert on this, I'm just going to go ahead and bring Jamie back in, and maybe we can field some of those questions that the audience had. And yeah, thank you so much for that practice.
Thank you very much, Nina.
You're getting lots of woohoo, Anne, and yes, you did great. And as John said, well done being put on the spot. I love that he said, John also wrote, you could avoid the loss of that 830K, but I would feel the net loss of a toxic environment would far outweigh 830,000.
Totally agree, John. And that's always the struggle of the toxicity. The negative cultural impacts are always the ones that are so hard with financially oriented leaders to grasp. But we all know that there's way more than what just the 830.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate John also commented earlier that he said he loved the avatar showing the body language and the guarded posture. Thank you for that. Yes, and that's part of the beauty of what we do is the learner can see and feel, the visceral reaction to the body language as well as the verbal, and that simulation specialist has the ability to do that as well, which makes it authentic. I really want this conversation to be about Anne. So if anybody does have any further questions about immersion, would like to learn more, perhaps experience a demo for yourself, I've dropped my email in there. We'll make sure you have that as follow-up. But I want to get to the questions for Anne. So early on, Susan had written, and because you talked about the negative of what they're losing, she said, do you also do the opposite? Tell a client how positive soft skills with specific real examples are helping their organization or team.
Yeah, just like we can identify someone that maybe is not doing great soft skills at bad behavior and quantify it. You can also find, especially in large organizations, pockets where there's a leader that is inspiring, that is motivating, and be able to look and say, how does that person's performance, whether it's employee engagement surveys, whether it's staff turnover, whether it's retention figures, or their ease of hitting targets or not, how does that leader's metrics compare to another leader's metrics who might only be an average leader? So there's definitely, you can do that. There's also taking the negative, walking them through that example, and then say, imagine if that daily interaction, rather than berating, was going in and showing people that you valued them, that it was acknowledging the good performers for the previous day's targets. How do you think people would feel after that interaction? Inspired, motivated, passionate, recommitted. Okay, so in a 8-hour day, what if they were felt better for 5 more minutes? And then you quantify that. So the exact same formula can be used for a bad behavior or a more inspiring behavior.
Excellent. We have so many questions coming in. I love it. Joe said, I'm really interested in what has been the feedback from the team members and these improvements in the EQ skills of their managers.
Yes. So if I go back to that example from 2016, the leader had the conversation with the direct report. The direct report, after a length of time, actually chose to leave. So the company saved money in terms of not having to pay redundancy for them to leave. Someone internal was promoted, someone that actually had intrinsically strong soft skills. The numbers went through the roof. And for the leader, he was like, oh, wow, this is what you've been talking about, and now I see it. So that's just that one example where a different person had different skills, people were happier, engagement went up, they more than hit their targets. I've seen it with people who have struggled before. And that's what I kind of say, I was an average leader, and most, there's a lot of average leaders. How do you get average to be just a bit better? And I've seen those from the various clients I work with one-on-one or in my leadership development programs, getting them that little bit better, that 10% incremental. We see engagement survey scores go up. We see 360 results go up for the leader. We hear a more positive cultural description of the environment.
Yeah, and Susan, just to piggyback, said, how long did it take for the numbers to go through the roof? Generally, how long does it take to see those results?
Oh, I'd love to be able to say that the results increase X amount over this time frame. And it varies so much by individual situation, depending on the company, the industry, the specific leader, the specific team leaders. I know in my one-to-one coaching work, we usually start seeing results within 4 to 6 months. Typically, that's going from usually a pre-score of around a 4 to 5 on a rating to a 6 to 7. And then after the 12 months, we usually get people to an 8 or a 9. Rarely does anyone get a 10. And after a year of coaching, the bar increases anyway.
Right. Keep moving that goal.
Yeah.
And yeah, as she was saying, a lot of companies would be looking at the cost of losing an employee rather than waiting for positive numbers to turn around. And I know there was a comment earlier about the cost of having to restaff when you lose those people because you haven't had this training. That's also, you know, an impact. And we're getting kind of a couple of different questions about that cost per se, like how did you quantify it? And Rhett said, and can you talk a bit about metrics to measure productivity and behavior and communication changes to increase productivity?
Yeah. When I'm working with a leader or a company, I always start with the metrics that they already have. You know, so what are they measuring in the organization? Are they measuring employee engagement? Are they measuring retention of staff? Are they measuring turnover by division or by leader? Are they measuring grievances or complaints? You know, number of grievances, number of complaints. Interestingly, when I was engaging with a new company earlier this year, they talked about having employee engagement surveys. And I'm like, great, you know, send me through the latest version. You know, what were their numbers? They couldn't quote the numbers. They couldn't find the latest report to send me. And they said they looked at it quarterly. Well, that kind of tells you something. So look at the metrics that they already track. If they're not tracking those things, that tells you something, and start with getting them tracked. Start pointing the organization to start pulling those numbers out of the system so that they can see their starting point. I'm usually hesitant to ask them to do new stuff. I rather use what they already have. The other barometer that's relatively easy is a 360. Typically, that's got about 35 to 40 quantifiable questions for a leader. If you do a whole leadership team, you get those numbers. And then you can redo that in 6 months, I usually say a year, and you can see the movement on those quantifiable questions. In terms of productivity measures, much harder to do. Again, go back to the organization. How do they measure it already? If there's none of these measurements, I do sit with people and say, where do you think you are currently on a scale of 1 to 10 on whatever that is, engagement, on productivity, and have them estimate where they are. Well, I think we're at a 4. Okay, great. 6 months after working with them, you check in. Where do you think you are? You have them rate it. 6 months later. It's totally subjective, I get that. It does have them stop and reflect a bit. And then with each of those ratings, I then start asking, what do you think are the behaviors that have been done that have moved the rating? So that they again have to reflect, well, these are the behaviors. It's not just a, oh, I've changed, but it's I've specifically developed a feedback model and I use that regularly. I engage in what I used to think were difficult conversations and now do constructive conversations. So I have them link their rating change to define behaviors they might have exhibited when there's nothing else that you can use.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that's covered a couple of different questions. So I'm going to invite those once we start going through. If something hasn't quite been answered and it's a little further up the chat, just bring that back to my attention. I don't mind. I welcome it. So John said, how do you apply this methodology to sales departments, which are churn and attrition houses by nature? And then there was an addition to that said, we find similar environment in some ad agency cultures as well. So.
Yeah. Interestingly, if it's a large organization and they have a sales department and they have other types of departments, so in an ad agency, if they've got the creative department versus the client service department, start to compare those numbers and have the leader do the comparison of those numbers. What are the differences? And then start asking what's behind those differences. What is causing the churn and attrition that they're seeing? Is it the type of people that they're bringing in and hiring in the first place who are looking to advance quickly, and that includes advancing out of the organization? Or is it people that are interested in loyalty and wanting to build a career with the organization? So look at the numbers and then also understand what's driving those numbers. Things like exit interviews. If you are in a place where there's huge attrition and turnover, putting something in around exit interviews to really find out what's going on is really helpful. Doing that anonymously or confidentially in a way that are going to get some truth of why people are leaving, and then start looking for themes or patterns that have come up.
Great, thank you so much for that. And Sean also had said, and I love it, just sort of in a nutshell, what's the, where is it? The number one method of getting through to a leader who is closed-minded?
Oh, the number is having them realize it themselves. Don't try and convince them or tell them. Ask enough questions and coach around it that they come to their own conclusion.
Brother Upred said, thanks, Anne, that's useful. You're a smarty.
Oh, thanks, Brett.
I love it. Thank you, Ron. Anne has very graciously offered an opportunity for one of you lucky folks to win one of her books sent to you. I'm sure she'll even sign it with a little note.
Yes.
So all you have to do is email her at ann@directions-coaching.com, and we're going to put that in the chat as well. And just write tips, please, all of you. As always, thank you so much for joining us and for being a part of our community here at our Immersion Virtual Roundtables. And thank you so much for spending your evening with us. And
My
we
pleasure,
so appreciate it and hope that you have a beautiful, blessed morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you may be calling in. And we're going to go ahead and say goodbye at this time. Thank you so much, everybody.